former Conservative leader, Iain Duncan Smith MP. Welcome to you. Do you think that the Prime Minister's speech has really laid out a prospect of agreement between Brussels and London?
I do, actually. I think what she did in the speech was what many have been asking for, which is to give a wide-ranging concept of what the relationship with the European Union and the UK would be afterwards. Intriguingly, I think she answered quite a lot of the questions that had been asked about what is our intentions, what do we consider that we would like to do, what we think would be in the benefits of both of us. And I think that makes this a good speech. In fact, I think it'll be a critical departure moment in these negotiations.
I mean, she did make it clear that there will be some adverse consequences of Brexit, and she also made it clear that there'll need to be some compromises, which some Brexiteers have argued against in both cases.
Well, when you say she made it clear there are adverse consequences, she said that Parliament, when in future, because of course the power comes back to Parliament, she was very clear about that, so arrangements around being part of agencies or other deals, Parliament will have to decide whether it wants to continue with those later on, but it will do so trying to balance out whether they consider there to be adverse consequences or not. There is, as you know, a very wide-ranging argument about what the consequences are of going to free trade with the rest of the world. There was this leaked report from government that suggested somehow that this was a marginal negative, but you've seen the Cambridge group of academics, there's also been the free trade economists, have all said they don't agree with that report, and they've actually put forward that this could be a major benefit. So going forward, it'll be Parliament that decides. That's
but what she did say is that, look, there's going to have to be some collaboration with European institutions. Yes. And you're happy with that, are you?
Yes, I've always said that we're leaving, as long as it's clear what we're leaving, customs union, single market, and we're taking back control to the UK, to Parliament and our courts, then I think all the rest of that is down to a relationship. And of course, relationships are often quite complex, but they are also negotiated, and that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying, and by the way, it's interesting today, the economics minister from France has been around and about today. I gather he's seeing the Treasury. He said categorically, UK is too important a market for us not to want to have a good free trade deal with them that allows us all to benefit.
And where do you think that leaves the border between North and South in the island of Ireland?
Well, I understand why the DUP are upset about this. There were three elements in that agreement in December. Only one of them was put forward in this legal text.
Well, they said that was the fallback.
Well, it's the absolute can't have anything and nobody wants to agree anything, which is the absolute ridiculous scenario, but they've got something for that. The other two are, one, what is a free trade arrangement all about? How does that affect the border? And the third one is all the technology, etc. And there's a very good report in the European Parliament that says it's wholly feasible to have very open borders, frictionless trade, because technology now. And by the way, they said this could be a good exemplar for the whole of the European Union with their external borders, and they're critical of the Commission for not pursuing that.
But the exception to that is that even between Sweden and Norway, for example, they have checks for lorries. They have to have some checks on the border for lorries. Now, that's a particular problem in Northern Ireland because symbolically, even if you only had a few for lorries and you said lorries have to go that way, that would be something that could potentially be a tax.
Well, let's get very clear about this. We've talked to the Norwegians about this, and they have said that the idea of the checks is all down to the European Union. They insist on that border. The Norwegians themselves do not believe they need half of those checks that are going on. The second thing is, if you look very carefully and go and have a look at the ports that deal with non-EU trade, like Felixstowe, etc., and they will tell you the time taken to get shipments from outside and out and away is literally hardly any time at all, because all of this container stuff is scanned and it's declared before it leaves. And that's the key point. There is very little reason why anything needs to be stopped at a border these days. It's mostly cleared before and then checked at the point of where it's delivered. And that's the key element of it.
But, I mean, to you as a former minister, potential Prime Minister when you're a party leader, I mean, you couldn't tolerate, or could you, a system of effectively turning a blind eye?
No, I mean, we're not talking about turning blind eyes, but you know, there are little elements within the cross-border elements of the Northern Ireland setup where shipments of milk and things like that have always been going on regardless of what the necessary conditions are of that border, because they're so integrated in many senses. What we're talking about here, by the way, is not really the Northern Ireland border, because only about 2% of Southern Ireland's trade goes through the Northern Ireland border. The real border is the border with the United Kingdom. 65% of their overseas trade goes to to the United Kingdom. So for the Southern Irish, the big issue is what does the border look like with the UK?
I wanted to ask you about that, because we've heard from the Prime Minister that what's called an east-west border is unacceptable. According to opinion polls in Northern Ireland and surveys in Northern Ireland, the majority of people in Northern Ireland would actually be quite happy with that solution.
Oh, I don't think anyone in Northern Ireland would even for one moment begin to recognise that this is any kind of a solution. I think the truth is...
But that's not what the public...
Well, you know, you can ask people a particular question without any explanation of what that actually means for them, and they might answer that's all right. In fact, the reality
strangely enough, people from the unionist community are more in favour of it than people in the nationalist community.
Well, my point is it depends what the question is you ask them. The reality is for trade, because Northern Ireland relies heavily on the United Kingdom for its trade, a huge amount of their trade is with the UK. The idea that you'd have an internal border would break the United Kingdom and would actually end up in the destruction of the idea of the Union. The key question for us, though, therefore, is they've got the cart before the horse at the European Union. This is what her speech was all about. She said, we need to get on with discussing what the trade arrangements are, because they dictate what kind of a border you have.
And do you think they've accepted that now?
Do you know, I think that there is more and more a pressing sense that they've got this wrong. They insisted on this stage-by-stage process. But what is actually going on, I've talked to a lot of representatives of various countries around, and there's a lot of under-the-surface anger about the way that the Commission is insisting on completing the process about the interim period, or the implementation period, without recognising that the deal that follows has a whole bearing on everything that happens. And what Theresa May was doing the other day was she was saying, look, all of these things are resolved once we understand what the relationship is. If we have a good free trade relationship, there is no need for any kind of seriously hard border. There will be very little friction at the borders, and most of this stuff is declared early and got rid of before it gets to the borders. Now, that's the key point. But unless we get to the point of a free trade arrangement, we cannot dictate what those borders will be like. So they have genuinely made a major mistake. And I think there's a lot of uneasy. And you hear the Hungarian economics minister, no, the foreign minister, I think, today, Mr. Kovacs, I think, is over-criticising the Commission for not getting on with the trade arrangements. And I think that's the general view.
Iain Duncan Smith, thank you very much.